and Demand, and I'm also a board member of EEEE, welcoming you to the second session of Panel 5 on business models, finance, and investment. We have three excellent speakers right now. The session is entitled Providing Support for Financial Institutions at the European Level. And to start about the European level, we're going to move to France to start off with and look at a program or project that is very French oriented, but it's going to have some European examples after time. Sebastien Delpont is actually the Associate Director of GreenFlex, which you will learn all about in the next couple of minutes. Sebastien, please take over.
Thanks, Rod. Hello, everyone. So happy to have a conversation with you about these issues. So in a few words, GreenFlex, we are an energy service company having a different range of service. First, consultancy, when it's about to build your roadmap, how to decarbonize your industry, and how to build your energy efficiency plan or turn to renewables. But besides doing slides, we support clients also for real in delivering and implementing these energy efficiency and energy transition measures with some PMO activities just to support, deal with setting the project out of the ground for real. Some also digital tools, because sometimes to make proper choice, you need some data to be crossed and to put people in perspective and control and to manage your efficiency properly. And the last activities we have is an ESCO activities with third-party finance solutions and also introducing clients with a solution from different financial institutions of the countries in order to find what's the best financing solutions and get them out of, oh, that's more than what we expected to invest, so we won't go for it. And the idea is to convince they're the smart way to deal with it. Let's find the smart way to do it with maybe other investors. That's the one year and other financing scheme that the one you're used to practice. So this is wide activities and what I'm going to present today. So we're 500 based in Paris with now European-wide activities with deployment of activities in Spain, Italy, and Germany. What I want to introduce you and speak to you about is a specific program we're running supervised by ADEME, so the French Energy Agency, and the Direction for Climate of the French Minister for Energy Transitions to accelerate energy efficiency in the industry. The situation in France, and it's not, I think, that different in many EU countries, is that energy efficiency is an issue which is, compared to its potential, poorly addressed by the industry financial community. So there have been a lot of efforts and of public policy to make popular and have people in factories to understand better where the potential, what should be done to decarbonize industry with energy efficiency. But many barriers are making that those projects that are feasible and technically feasible do not happen. And main reason that was analyzed is after a wide effort to let technicians know the issues if the guys in charge of finance in this industrial companies are not used to what we're doing. They believe that things are technically complicated. They believe that a solution are not efficient enough. They're shifted, and they basically lack of knowledge that they will consider, yeah, this is not a safe investment, based on their belief that dates from a long time sometimes, and which is not updated at all. And that's really something which is, making and blocking a lot of projects getting out of the ground. We've also believed, for instance, that 28% of industry considered that, not that many green investments allow a return on investment for real. And a lot of investors, especially in the industry, thinks that many green investments are not mature enough to be implemented. So basically, we think that the difference between what is in the head of people in charge of investing decision industry related to those green investments to improve activities and processes compared to what is reality. And that's really about facing this bias that we worked on. And obviously, there's a lot of challenge for the EU industry, and you know the figures by heart, many of you. Issues of cost reduction for sure, risk management, We're going to have more stringent energy and carbon regulation, hopefully, and we need to have more added value. That's all the challenge, and have product with an embedded low carbon footprint is going to be more and more a key added value for products for in the industry. It's really key. So all countries do not have the same level of advancement to catch their potential in matter of energy efficiency, but still in France we can see there's a huge potential. We consider there's like a technical potential of energy efficiency in industry in France. All industry, I'm not widening, considering chemistry, agro-food business, all kind of industry, which is basically 20%. And out of the 20% of this technical potential, we have 2/3 that could be achieved through very proven solutions. I mean, this is not Star Wars solution. This is really, I wouldn't say low tech, but I wouldn't say that's really something that people know, are used to, and that no technician consider complicated, difficult, or unusual. And that's all the challenge, is how we can make that out of the technical potential, this 2/3 potential with simple solution will be achieved. And these simple solution, as they are simple technically, they're also simple to finance. And it's no rocket science in matter of also a finance scheme to make them out of the ground. But all the challenge is, as I was mentioning previously, the guys in the banks or in the financial departments of industrial, they just don't know about it. So the issue and really what we want to work about is green finance. That's not just about designing and delivering new green product. Obviously, that's needed. Also needed to train people working in banks or financial departments, also at the bottom of the pyramid of banks. That's the guy in the agency in the center of France. Yeah, he's a good guy, but he was in school 20 years ago, and nobody told him at the time what were finance schemes which are quite efficient to finance investment for energy efficiency or low carbon solution in factories. Nobody told him about. So he doesn't know about it. That's 20 years is delivering finance solutions to the CFO of the factory next door. Which are not at all about energy efficiency, and you just don't know solution that might exist and that the guy in the head office in Paris might have developed specifically and intendedly with green bonds or the kind of green finance schemes. And the idea is we need to have people bottom of the pyramid in these financial departments or banks to know about it. Because if they know about it, they will help their clients more widely and be good ambassador of the green finance solution for the industry. Really, the aim of this INVEST program, which is a capacity building program dedicated to this financial community that deals with investment in industry. So we work both in educating offer and demand. So within the industry, that's about CFO and financial department of the industrial, and mostly banks in the financial side. And the idea is having people understanding better pros and cons, what are the risks, and do not have fantasy, all that and be over risked. No. Let's see for real what are facts, how we can mitigate this risk when this risk exists. That's all the challenge of better knowledge all through the value chain of this challenge for that. So this program is financed through dedicated white certificate scheme we have in France, where it's just not financing equipment, but I would say, I wouldn't go into much detail, but basically this kind of studies that helps driving up the market, but any market players, it's just not for activities of GreenFlex, but for most activities of the markets, this is financed with a co-financing line coming from a life program, which is intended to more globally help designing more greener products in the financial French institutions. So then, yeah, I was mentioning we have like 3 main market players that we're targeting in this way to educate the market to have more projects getting out of the ground. So obviously banks with different departments within the banks, obviously that's people, that's the clients every day, which are the day-to-day contact of CFOs, of SMEs or big companies in industry. Obviously, there are also other people in their inside departments, because sometimes people are risk analysts or back office manager, need also to be told about all the subtleties, innovation in these low carbon and green finance tools that exist. So they need to be told about it, because if they don't know, they won't help them being delivered for real in the market. Obviously, industrial companies and their CFO, and we're getting people which are advisor for industrial companies. That could be accountants, that could be lawyers, that could be auditors. We don't want that people that are advising the CFOs are saying, oh, never heard about that. Yeah, that's risky. No, we don't want that. So we need also people that will influentiate this public CFO of industry to know better about what can be done and what's the reality of risk, and also return on investment of kind of investment you can do in industry. So yeah, as was mentioning early on, that's figures that documents why it's key to work in that. There's consideration that many departments and financial department have so much to deal with, especially after a crisis like the European economy faced, I mean the worldwide economy faced. They're just overloaded with dealing with day-to-day not paying, difficult, yeah, to deal with the ground. So obviously it starts with some teaching. There's some training. We have the more personalized. As the program was designed before the crisis, at first we want to see it for real. We also try to develop some tools, because we just want people to show up at a class and then they go home and they forget. We want that to tell them about those green finance solutions, to come home with some tools that fits their needs for real. That could be about risk analysis, that could be a checklist. I mean, various tools we're delivering that's with panels of these various end users in this financial community appear to be what they would need in their day-to-day operation. And also creating a community favoring exchange. Basically, when this positive community, people could say, yeah, I might see it just a find something that makes sense for the future of our industry, for the planet, and want this green finance industry to become a club where people would meet, chat, and be pleased to show up and share their good practice and their feedbacks, to also have the future training of people next year be better, because benefiting from more feedbacks from people practicing it for real day to day. I really want people to embed in a community and just not showing up at a class. So also you have some people that think, yeah, I'm so good at green finance, I really need absolutely no training. That's times people are not as good as we wish they were. So we have a first, which is really either logged in and check. They can test themselves and see how efficient they are, all good, deep in their knowledge. And basically they can, yeah, through this test, adjust how good they are. And okay, if you want to get even better than when you are, you have this session. So to kickstart the system, also the way as we have publicly funded, the idea is the first training session were for free. Show up and be trained for free to be better doing 2 days training about these ways, energy efficiency and low carbon solution for industry. And the idea is to have people telling to each other, oh, that's good, you should really definitely show up, it works well. So the idea, first batch of 300 people for which tuition fee would be for free. And then second round of people that would have the price before it becomes something sustainable, where people pay for the training, and then the systems run for itself with a tuition fee that people are paying for. And then the idea is to have also just not indoor training or training in front of your computer, but also have practice. And the also is you benefit in entering into this program also some coaching. Sometimes you're doing something that you were told about that is classic, but when it's difficult and you're facing your first clients, that the first time you're seeing a CFO of an industry, and that you're going to tell them about, oh, you know, I'm from the bank and I was told there's new financing schemes for you guys. And for the first time, you have to analyze the project for real. They can benefit from our coaching. So the idea is when you're going to be back to business, back to your office, you won't be lost. The first time you're going to practice what you were told, we're going to support you, and you won't be by yourself. And then the idea to live this community, because we want it to be a really living community of people sharing this good practice. We're going to provide and share barometers to see how fast is the market moving. We hope for the best. Sharing some ideas of these best practice, new decision-making tools on some methodology that could be inspired either for practice of these guys in this community or the practice that have been developed elsewhere in Europe or elsewhere in the world that will just translate to French, because sometimes we're not that good in our country to speak other foreign language. So best practice written in other language than French might not have the same effect that written in French. So we just translate it. So we are really keen to get connected to network like ECE. So keep seeing and learning about best practice in this financing scheme that helps for real decarbonization of the industry to feed this community, and also obviously through also writing and considering and making and synthesis about all the best practice we would witness. Happy to share more widely what we will see. As we're a program which is publicly financed, I mean, with supervision of the French Energy Agency and the governments, obviously what we're doing will be designing, I mean, all those tools are meant to be free and open source from everybody to benefit from it. And was to say at first, we're going to have a good leverage effect in the market targeting and at first 1,000 players to jump into it for that to scale up. That's the ambition. So we were able to train 200 people before confinement. And now the challenge, you have to show up for real at conference day. We're just adjusting the systems to make it accessible online. That's it. And then we have first clients that jump into it. And now we're hoping it will help many projects being financed and having an impact for real. And especially, I think this program will be useful in months to come because we have some clients starting asking us, oh, there's a huge national or regional EU recovery plan. I heard that it's going to be a very green deal, and a lot of low carbon will be favored, but I kind of lost. So how would you help me understand how it works? Yeah, it's very new, so I'm kind of lost. So we'll be happy to clarify to those many banks or CFOs elsewhere, everywhere in the countries, how it works and how I'm jump into this wave and benefits and project that would help decarbonization of the industry. Thanks.
Sebastien, thank you so much. I'm a great believer in capacity building programs like this. I noticed that one of the banks is BNP Paribas, and the chairman of the board is a guy named Jean Lemire, and he used to be the president of the EBRD. And back in those days, in the early 2000s, he was the greatest supporter of financing energy efficiency. So let's hope it continues. Now I'd like to move on to the second presentation by Carsten Glenting. Carsten is a partner of a company that I cannot pronounce, and I will let him do it. I call it VMAS, but what we're going to hear about now is a Europe-wide network. Carsten, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rod. And the correct company name is Viegand Maagoe, but VMAS is fine because it's impossible to pronounce if you don't have a Danish language background. So I will be talking about the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group, what it does and how it acts as a catalyst for decarbonization in Europe. A bit of background first. Oops, I think I just have to activate. Yes. So the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group was established in 2013 by DG Energy and UNIP Financial Institutions. They saw a need to bring together public and private financial institutions, industry representatives, sector experts and policymakers to discuss what are the barriers for channeling more financing into energy efficiency across both buildings and industry. This group of highly esteemed experts and specialists then in 2015 issued a report called Energy Efficiency, the First Fuel for the EU Economy. If you haven't read it, I would strongly recommend it. It is still a central report in the thinking in the area. It highlighted clearly that energy efficiency investments are strategically important for the European Union. It's important in the context of decarbonization of the buildings and the industry, but it's also important in the context of staying competitive in a world where not everybody else are moving as quick to decarbonization as the European Union. And some countries have very low energy prices, as also highlighted by Sebastien before. Now, therefore, there is a financing challenge. A lot of money needs to be channeled into energy efficiency, and there are limitations on the public budgets. Of course, that is even more challenging now with the recovery after the COVID situation. So there is a need to mobilize private financing to contribute also to energy efficiency investments. Then it identified two key barriers. First of all, that there was at that time a lack of real performance data on energy efficiency investments. Everybody said there were low-hanging fruits and that it worked, but there was no comprehensive data source available to prove that this was actually the case. So there was an argument, it's important to establish such a reference database. And furthermore, it was also highlighted that if you go to a financial institution, you will be met by different requirements for the same projects. And in the end, you will often also be required to provide a guarantee from an external party and not just the project. So there was a need to work on how are energy efficiency projects financed. This project has been a key source for subsequent development of energy efficiency policy in the EU, and it was also formative in establishing the work strands that have existed since then for the Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group. Now, EEFIG, as I mentioned, is public and private financial institutions, it's banking associations, it's industry representatives, it's energy efficiency experts, and it's definitely also key people from the European Commission. I would highlight the kind of work that has been done until now and do a bit of marketing for the ongoing work and also to get people to engage in it because we think it's really interesting. As a direct response to the two challenges that were identified in the 2015 report, two tools were developed over the period 2016 to 17. First, a database of actual realized energy efficiency projects called the DEEP, the De-risking Energy Efficiency Platform, was established. That is still being developed, and I'll give you a bit of introduction to it in a couple of minutes. In parallel with that, a reference book for financial institutions in the understanding of what are energy efficiency investments, what are the risks, and how can they be financed was developed. It's called the EEFIG Energy Efficiency Underwriting Guidance. Now, on the back of that, we are currently running a number of working groups that each address a salient issue in the current discussion of energy efficiency and how we can promote investments. There is a working group that has recently finished its work on the EU Taxonomy for Sustainable Finance and tackling of energy efficiency loans. Bettina, in 10 minutes, will be introducing you to the work around the EU Taxonomy that this working group has fed into. Then there is a working group that is trying to provide a comprehensive overview of different financing practices for energy efficiency across both buildings and industry. There is a working group on multiple benefits of energy efficiency projects, in particular in the building sector. What are the things apart from just the saving on the energy bill that results from a building renovation? For instance, improved indoor climate, etc., improved value of the house, and how can they possibly be capitalized and documented? And there are two working groups that I will be talking a bit about, one on the financial performance of energy efficiency loans, one on further improvement in energy efficiency in industry, which is actually headed by Rod, who's chairing the session. And then finally, a newly created working group is looking at the financing of energy efficiency in the context of the new MFF. MFF is the EU's multi-annual financial framework. It is how money is dispersed through the different funds and other arrangements of the EU. So that will be looking at how will energy efficiency be ensured to be a part of the Green Deal Investment Act plan, and also of the recent Recovery and Resilience Facility, as well as the Just Transition Mechanism. Now, in parallel with this, of course, we're also doing other activities. We're doing dissemination activities and stakeholder activations. It used to be a lot of physical meetings. Over the last half year, there has been a lot of Zoom meetings. Works surprisingly well, but of course, we would love to see people collect together again in Brussels in the not too different future. We'll just make a bit of commercial here. There will be a new EEFIG newsletter coming up very soon. And we are also working on a new and attractive EEFIG website, which will be launched within the next half year. Going a bit more into detail with the specific tools and working groups. First, I mentioned that we have established a platform or database of actual realized energy efficiency projects. I think it's a brilliant tool. I will strongly encourage people to visit it and use it. It's very good for reference purposes. It's good for benchmarking of other projects. And it's particularly good in situations where you lack data in a certain situation. It's an open source database, and it includes currently more than 15,000 projects, 10,000 in industry and 5,000 in buildings. And it's being increased all the time. We will, around October this year, add 2,000 new projects that we've received from the EIB under the ELENA facility. So that's an additional 2,000 buildings projects. It has been provided by 30 different data providers, and we're regularly adding both new data and improved functionality. And it's open for all. There is a link provided that you can use to visit it. We think it's very user-friendly, but we would love to have feedback. So anybody who visits it and say, wow, this is interesting, but why can't I do this? Please provide us feedback. There is a vehicle for doing that also in the platform. I could talk about this for an hour, but I think we need, in respect of time, to continue. Then the EEFIG underwriting guide, which was the second large tool that was developed in the response to the 2015 report, is a reference guide for financial institutions in understanding what are energy efficiency investments and how can they be financed. Also, I would encourage using and visiting it. It exists in an electronic version, which is also freely available. I'll then dwell a bit upon the ongoing working groups. We don't have time to go through all of them. I mentioned them earlier, but I will just highlight two as examples of the things that are done by the EEFIG. One working group, I just have to note what the time is also. One working group is looking at the financial performance of energy efficiency loans. And the idea is if you can prove that an energy efficiency loan that leads to improved energy efficiency in a building it in the end also reduces the risk of the underlying loans for the building, because it improves the building quality, it improves the cash flow of the owner of the building, it increases the market price of the asset. Then there are actually arguments for having a green support factor or a positive treatment of energy efficiency loans and possibly a broader class of sustainable assets in the balance sheets of banks. Because currently there is no difference between a loan to a coal producer or a loan to an energy efficiency renovation. We would love to see that in the future they would be treated differently. Really interesting work is ongoing here, and gradually it will also be disseminated. Of course, if you really want to change the capital requirements for banks, we need very substantial documentation. So we're working with a group of financial institutions and trying to establish this. Then we have recently launched a working group which is led by Rod. And this working group is looking at the particular challenges of energy efficiency in industry. Industry is a really broad group of different enterprises. It's both the heavy industry that has very high energy costs and for whom it's really important to stay competitive to reduce them. And then it's also on the other end, small and medium enterprises for whom energy efficiency is not in any way the most urgent thing in their day-to-day survival. Of course, there's an EU policy framework around this. There is the emission trading system, there's the Energy Efficiency Directive, and in many countries there are national arrangement and national support schemes and networks supporting industry. But we're trying to take a cross-cutting picture of the European Union and looking at what are the main obstacles, what are the main drivers, what are the good cases where it's actually possible to promote energy efficiency investment in industry? How can they be shared and to which extent are they relevant for sharing and replication? And then on the basis of that, we will contribute to formulating both general and specific recommendations for tools and for policy definition that may be taken up by the EU or by national states. So what I'm trying to argue here is that EEFIG, even though it's more a forum of analysis and discussion and recommendations rather than actual investment, is a catalyst for deep decarbonization. The EEFIG 2015 report clearly has had an input and an impact on a subsequent policy definition in the European Union in the area. The ongoing engagement and communication also at a national level during 2016-17, there was a number of national processes running also in this area. The tools developed in terms of the deep platform and the underwriting toolkit, and then the results that will be coming out of the ongoing working groups. The taxonomy and tagging already fit into the definition of the taxonomy for buildings. The other working groups will be feeding into policy definition in a number of areas. This all gives insight that is shared with the Commission, with the financial sector, and with the industry experts. And in the end, it's them who have to act. The Energy Efficiency Financial Institutions Group in itself does not have a mandate to act as an entity, but we have a mandate to provide insight and to ensure that other people make informed decisions that hopefully promote energy efficiency investments. I think this is actually the end of the presentation and maybe even 1 minute ahead of time. Thank you, Rod.
Carsten, thank you so much. I hadn't mentioned to people before that I was involved with EEFIG, but I am. So we'll get into that a little bit more. The third presentation is from somebody else who has been very involved with EEFIG since the beginning, Bettina Dorendorf, who is with the KfW German Development Bank, and she is the Senior Sustainability Manager. So Bettina is going to be talking about another aspect that EEFIG has got involved in, although she's going to look at it in a little broader sense in terms of the work on EU taxonomy, because it's so fundamental to sort of unlocking financing. Bettina, please.
Yes, thank you very much. So good afternoon to all of you. I thank ECEE and the panel leaders for the opportunity to speak here today. And speaking about sustainable investments and energy efficiency investments form part of it will hardly be possible in the future without taking into account the EU taxonomy on ecologically sustainable activities. Next slide, please. Let me first give you some overview on what we are going to talk about. I'm going to present you the main features of a new and very impactful regulation called the EU Taxonomy Regulation. It entered into force in July 2020. The objectives of my presentation are the following. First, I will give you a short introduction to the taxonomy regulation and explain the structure and main features of the taxonomy approach for sustainability. Second, I will briefly outline the new reporting requirements for the financial and corporate sector which result from the legislation. Third, we will look at the implications and potential challenges for corporate energy efficiency investments to the degree they can be assessed until now. And finally, I will sum up and conclude. Next slide, please. Let me give you some background on the political context. As we all know, achieving the goals of the Paris Agreement, namely carbon neutrality in 2050, will require a huge volume of additional investments. The amount necessary every year is estimated to be in the range of between 175 to 290 billion euros, according to UNEP-FI. There are no sufficient public funds to finance this investment need, and therefore it is crucial to involve private capital. Starting point for the development of the EU taxonomy was the EU Action Plan on Financing Sustainable Growth in March 2018. And one of the most relevant objectives of this plan was to achieve a reorientation of capital flows towards sustainable investments. The problem, however, is that until now, there is no clear and widely accepted definition of what the term sustainability or sustainable actually means. And this is the reason why the EU Action Plan came up with a legislative proposal to develop a clear taxonomy for ecologically sustainable economic activities. Next slide, please. Let's have a look how the EU taxonomy is structured. The EU taxonomy is looking at 6 environmental objectives: climate change mitigation, climate change adaptation, sustainable use of water, transition to a circular economy, pollution prevention, protection of healthy ecosystems. The EU taxonomy provides a list of economic activities. And for each of these activities, it is defined under which conditions exactly they can be regarded as sustainable. 3 conditions have to be met for economic activity in order to be taxonomy compliant. You'll see this in the middle of the slide. First condition, the activity has to make a substantial contribution to at least one of the 6 environmental objectives I just mentioned. For this purpose, a metric as well as a threshold is defined. For instance, in the case of building renovation, there is a choice between 2 options. One of them defines the primary energy demand as the metric and 30% savings as the threshold. Let's have a look at the second condition. No harm must be caused to the remaining environmental objectives. So in economic activity must first comply or prove a substantial contribution to an environmental objective, but at the same time prove that no harm is caused to the other remaining 5 environmental objectives. In order to prove this, a so-called do no significant harm assessment has to be conducted, and we will look at this in detail a little bit later. Third condition is the compliance with so-called minimum social safeguards. And please note that this condition relates to the corporate level. The first 2 conditions relate uniquely to the economic activity level. The criteria for each each economic activity have been developed by a technical expert group, which has been mandated by the European Commission. The criteria are actually very ambitious in the sense that they lead the way towards climate neutrality in 2050, and they are also based on scientific evidence. I think without any doubt, the EU taxonomy creates a long-term benefit. For the first time, there will be a clear idea under which conditions exactly an economic activity can be regarded as ecologically sustainable. This creates a high level of transparency on the one hand, and on the other hand, it increases reliability for investors in sustainable investment products, as well as for fund managers seeking to create a credible, sustainable investment product. As a result, such a clear definition also reduces the risk of the so-called greenwashing in the sense of naming investment product green or sustainable, but without obligation to prove it based on facts. Next slide, please. So how does the taxonomy work? There is a taxonomy regulation. It has been negotiated during months between the European Commission, the Council, and the Parliament, and it is actually already enforced since 12 July 2020. It is directly binding for all European member states. The regulation provides the framework. It defines the environmental objective the taxonomy relates to, the conditions to be met, the scope of reach, and this is important. It also creates new reporting requirements for different stakeholders. The technical screening criteria I just mentioned are developed by an expert group, and then they are proposed to the European Commission. This work will be achieved in several steps. As a first step, the technical expert group has started to look at the first two objectives, climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation, and has developed technical criteria for a catalog of 70 economic activities covering 7 sectors. Once the European Commission has accepted the criteria, they enter into force via a delegated act, which is scheduled for end of 2020. Application starting by the end of 21. The work of the TAC has now finished, and the platforms of sustainable finance starting work in October will continue and define the relevant economic activities and technical screening criteria for remaining 4 environmental objectives. With a second delegated act scheduled for end 2021, they will enter into force. So taking into account that the catalog of economic activities and technical criteria just for the two first environmental objectives had a volume of more than 400 pages, it becomes clear that the vast and very complex universe of criteria and conditions is in the process of being created, has to be digested by the stakeholders and put into operation. And this is definitively a big challenge. Next slide, please. Let me underline that the EU taxonomy regulation will have a long-term and cross-cutting relevance for the corporate and financial sector. The reason is that it creates new reporting and disclosure requirements for financial market participants, such as fund managers, as well as large companies. Fund managers, provided they market their investment product as sustainable or as having environmental characteristics, will have to disclose to which degree the investments financed by their funds comply with the taxonomy criteria based on turnover, capex, or opex. Large companies, meaning companies with more than 500 employees who have to report under the non-financial reporting directive, have to declare in their non-financial reporting how and to which extent their activities are in line with the taxonomy criteria. In order to produce this reporting, the project promoters or corporates have to produce and deliver the relevant data and information. Also, the regulation states that the EU Commission shall take into account the taxonomy in future regulation for financial products with green character. So what is the relevance for the corporate sector? You're probably asking yourself now. Well, these data and information to prove the degree of compliance with the taxonomy criteria have to be produced and delivered by real economy market actors. There is actually no obligation to comply with the technical criteria for reporting purposes. Transparency is here the main objective. There is, however, currently one exception. Investment projects which seek to be refinanced by a green the new EU green bond standard require full compliance with EU taxonomy criteria. We do not know how market participants will react on the transparent report obligations. Subject is new. Implications for the different stakeholders are not yet very clear. Many aspects of practical implementation still have to be sorted out. One of the critics expressed is the lack of data to comply with the requirements. I think, however, the EU taxonomy will become an important benchmark for sustainable investment. And the pressure to comply fully or to achieve the criteria of the EU taxonomy might increase. One fund marketed as sustainable seeks to present a high share of investments in full compliance with the EU taxonomy. So at present, market participants are just beginning to digest what this new regulation means for them, and the timing for the first reporting, it will relate to the financial year 2021, is very short. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at the practical side of the application of the EU taxonomy criteria. To give you a flavor of what expect, let's look at the example of a non-residential renovation. This example, I looked at the first environmental objective, climate change mitigation, and at the metrics and thresholds proposed by the technical expert group for building renovation. What we see on the left side, that there is a choice between two options. First one, compliance with the existing building regulation. Well, I think this will not cause a major challenge because this building renovations have to comply anyway with the current legislation. The next option is a relative improvement of primary energy demand. I just mentioned earlier on. So building renovation must show at least a 30% reduction of primary energy demand in comparison with the energy performance before rental. This can be concluded, the measures can be concluded within 3 years. So we can say that meeting or proving a substantial contribution to the objective climate change mitigation is not the issue in the case of building renovation. Next slide, please. The do no significant harm assessment is the more difficult part, not only for commercial building renovation, but also for all other economic activities for which the technical expert group has suggested technical criteria. Many of the criteria which have to be met are not aligned with the current market practices, and they tend to complicate the investment process and trigger additional costs. Let's perhaps, please change the slide. Let's have a look at the do no significant harm criteria for Objective 5, pollution prevention and control. So one of the conditions is that non-road mobile machinery, which is used on the construction site, must comply with the regulation on pollutant emissions EU 2016-1628. So this is a very quite a new regulation and requires new equipment to be used on the construction site, proving very low emitting machinery. well, the regulation defines very strict emission limits for the different power ranges and applications. So a company, let's assume a small company wanting to renovate a non-commercial building, a commercial building, will have to make sure that the company contracted is in the condition to work with this low emission machinery. This requirement narrows the choice of the construction companies and involves an increase of costs. While this is one example, I would like to draw your attention on another very difficult example, which relates to Objective 6, protection of healthy ecosystems. Here, the Do No Significant Harm assessment requires that at least 80% of the timber products used in the renovation for structures, cladding, finishes must stem from recycled or recycled sources, or must be sourced from sustainably managed forests. So the latter has to be certified by a third-party certification performed by an accredited certification body. Compliance with this Do No Significant Harm criteria is particularly difficult. Why? Because the global trade flows of timber, they actually complicate, according to our desk research, make it challenging to have certainty as to the type of forest where the timber was produced. Also, provided the required certificate triggers additional cost for sourcing the material and obtain the required certificate. So with these actually small examples, you see that there is quite a difficulty and a complexity element in the Do No Significant Harm assessment. We looked at all the conditions for and asked ourselves whether they are impossible to comply with. And for each of the criteria, I think we can state that if you want to comply, there is a solution. However, it will lead to increased cost. It complicates the whole investment process. And at the end, the question of motivation is in the room. Next slide, please. So let me sum up. The EU taxonomy is definitively the first European standard to define sustainability based on scientific evidence. It will have a long-term and cross-cutting impact on the corporate and financial ecosystem. Its high level of ambition and degree of complexity will create challenges for the investment process into sustainable projects such as energy efficiency. So in particular, the Do No Significant Harm criteria constitute the largest challenge because they add a high degree of complexity to the EU taxonomy. In many cases, they do not correspond to the current market practice, although each criteria as such does not seem unfulfillable. Market participants need time and preparation to deal with the new information and data requirements and establish corresponding processes. At this point in time, many questions for putting the taxonomy into operation are still to be worked out. For instance, the procedures for collecting and quality control of data and information have still to be developed. It is still unclear which entities are responsible to assess the completeness and quality of the taxonomy-related information. So the primary motivation to create the EU taxonomy was to increase the investment flow into sustainable projects and investments. And although the taxonomy delivers an important step towards transparency and reliability regarding the sustainable nature of an investment, I think it has to be seen to to which extent and in which time frame it will deliver on the primary motivation. In any case, most actors of the real economy will be affected by new data and information requirements, as it seems right now. And the corporate sector should start preparing for the new data and information requirements to be produced for reporting purposes. From the perspective of a promotional bank, we think support is needed for the corporate sector, in particular for smaller and medium-sized companies. KfW, for instance, has developed a promotional scheme incentivizing investment in taxonomy compliant projects. And with this, we offer the first European scheme for this purpose. So I would like to conclude, and thank you very much. I'm looking forward to your questions.
Bettina, thank you very much. The whole taxonomy issue is so complex, you know, and but really necessary. It's great. Oh, yes, here I am. Okay. We're going to have some question and answer period right now. I'm going to be really nasty to Sebastien. How much have you used the EEFIG tools, the underwriter's toolkit, or the deep database? And I think I know the answer, but if you aren't using them, do you see them being valuable for the type of capacity building you're doing right now in the INVEST program?
Well, obviously, that's a document we obviously consider and tools we want to use and to get known more widely in the French financial community. Obviously, we don't intend to reinvent the wheel. We want to exist. So, and really, the meaning of a capacity building program is to let know more widely what good tools were developed to a wider public, which are not sometimes familiar with these in very interesting, and especially career, which is the language career.
I mean, Carsten mentioned the fact that EEFIG is coming out with a newsletter. I mean, in some ways, EEFIG has been poor at dissemination so far, and hopefully projects like yours and initiatives like yours will know more about it. The sooner the better, right, Carsten?
Yes, that's definitely the plan. I think we have produced really good tools that have been used by too few people. So clearly one of the important focus points going forward is to disseminate and make sure that more people are aware of the tools and are using them. I think there's also a language issue. We must admit still that even though English is broadly spoken and used, a lot of national processes run better in national languages. And while the deep platform is available in 6 languages, the toolkit is still only available in English. And I think going forward, we're looking at options to make more of the products available in multiple languages, including possibly automatic translation, given that AI-based translation is improving.
Okay, thanks. Bettina, you had a question that you wanted for Sebastien. Why don't you ask the question? I can't hear you.
Sorry, micro. So Sebastien, I just wanted to know in which languages the capacity building program is available, how much it costs, and what the feedback was so far. So what what did your customers say? Where did they see the main added value?
So at first, as we're a French-based initiative, the public targeted was French. So every document and everything prepared was in French, because there is to target the community that do not often read English and all new developments made at EU level. So that was what we made. Maybe if it works, we'll be happy to scale up and maybe develop more widely at EU level. Maybe there will be a smart way to scale up these capacity buildings. The training, so I wasn't mentioning, Running price will be 2,000 euro per participant for this 2-day training, which is compared to training session quite decent in price for the training. The first web test and training is for free, so anybody can log in and give it a try to test and assess its level just for free. And if they consider convincing enough, they can go for it. And that's this 2,000 euro session that we offer to the first 300 that are going to show up first. That would be half price for the 300 following, and then will remain at the cost. So that's the way we and how we demonstrate the systems for this startup, because also we beginning of the year, and obviously what happened make it go less faster than we would have expected.
There was a question for you, Sebastien, as well. We're keeping you busy right now. Is there a community only in France? How is the share between banks, industrial companies, and industrial partners in the community?
Yep, good point.
Also, on that point, you had wanted to train 1,000 people by end of next year. And so that share between those three is also quite important for that.
Yeah. We're targeting 2/3 of people from banking institution to be trained for these capacity building schemes. There will be 30% which should be CFO from industrial, and 10% that will be the advisors of those CFOs, as I was mentioning, accountants or consultants or lawyer. That's what we're aiming to deliver with these 1,000 people trained up to the end of next year.
So when you're talking,
for now, it's a French community based that we hope will become European if it works. So at first, that was a national funded scheme that we were asked to be done in French, because done in French, building connection. But the idea is spreading all the great EU ideas, and if it works, we'll be keen to maybe go back to EU, our governments or EU to say maybe there's a smart action to scale up, and that what was tested in France should be and could add value to be deployed elsewhere in EU.
So, I've just lost the train of the thought of that. Right now. Oh yes, I know what I want to say. So you're really talking, when you're talking about CFOs now, you're talking about large industry. You're not talking about SMEs and that. You're talking about quite large companies.
Both. We're trying to target, because when we see where is the unlocked potential of energy efficiency. Sometimes if you go to Airbus or you go to Peugeot, I mean, they have a big CFO department. I have one guy dedicated to that, and he knows about it. So most of the unlocked potential might be rather in SMEs, and that's really kind of companies we're targeting. They could be industry with 100 people employed, or 400 people employed within the company with 2, 3, 4 factories in a region. That's kind of also where we need some unlocking, with a focus initially on the free industries, where I think there's a lot of potential, which is manufacturing, chemistry, and food industry. Because in France, it might be different, the background in other EU countries, but that's where we see, and all studies show that where is rely most of this potential of simple action to be implemented, which are value for money very quickly, but people do not implement because they just don't understand how easy it could be to finance it through a solution that exists into the banks, but are not that widely used.
Bettina, in terms of all of this work on taxonomy, how much would, whatever your entity, how much would French banks or French financial institutions know about it? And where would they learn about it?
So the taxonomy, the taxonomy regulation creates new reporting requirements for large companies, including large banks with more than 500 employees, because these entities have to report under the so-called non-financial reporting directive. And a new requirement under the non-financial reporting directive has been introduced with the taxonomy regulation. So it's now large entities will be informed via the networks of regulatory developments that the new reporting obligation will come in place. So we at KfW, for instance, we are actually looking already and assessing our portfolio whether to answer the question to which degree our products are in compliance with the EU taxonomy. So there will be a reporting obligation, and the first year starts in the first financial year to report on will be the year 2021. And for the two, in relation to the first two environmental objectives for which the criteria have been developed. So now, what will happen? So financial institutions, for instance, they don't know yet what kind of KPI will be the one they have to report. This will only be known by a delegated act, which will be available by mid next year. So we're a little bit in the air with regard to what kind of KPI we will have to report on. However, we know that we have to look at to which degree the products can be analyzed to determine the degree of compliance with the taxonomy criteria. And large companies, let me say this sentence because this was the motivation to write the peer-reviewed paper. Large companies and also energy efficiency funds and sustainable funds, they will have to look and ask the companies or project promoters they have been financing. They will ask them for information which are closely linked to the EU taxonomy in order to determine to which degree the projects they have been financing are in compliance with the taxonomy. So fund managers will have to report on the degree, the percentage of projects or economic activities which are in compliance with the EU taxonomy or not in compliance. And these data, they will demand from the project promoters or demand from the companies which they have been financing. That's why it's important from my point of view that the corporate sector starts looking carefully at this new regulation and starts like connecting with the auditors and the parties they have to report to see how they can best prepare.
And I should say, to complement what was said, clearly for when we train the first CFOs, just the existence of the EU taxonomy was just a news for them. They wouldn't know it would even exist as CFO of a small industry. And for sure, they thought, oh, but for the investment fund that holds 20% of our company, that's going to be an issue. Yes, it will. And also for our clients, they're going to have to justify when we sell them a product, in which category does it fit? Because whether it's going to be a good thing or not, compare the investments they're going to make, where it would fit. So definitely, I think for a community which is compliance driven for many people, and they would very carefully want to comply what are the rules, this new law is going to come is something very important in that mind and could be a driver beside the fact that projects are just value for money, an additional driver, which I think will be very useful or strong to have more projects getting out of the ground.
Let me also mention something. So when I worked on the peer-reviewed paper, it was hard to get information on the EU taxonomy. There is hardly no good material on it. So I really had to search hard to collect other voices. This will become better because by autumn there will be the text of the delegated act, which will define define the technical criteria for the first catalog of economic activities. And then I think the market will start waking up. What also strikes my attention is that this taxonomy is a very important reference in all EU documents. So if you read the Sustainable Finance Strategy, for instance, the EU taxonomy is mentioned, has a strong link to all what the Sustainable Finance Strategy is talking about. Also, these days, the EU taxonomy is mentioned when it comes to define the conditions for providing European financial support. So these days it's taken as an orientation, but more and more we think it will become a kind of obligation. It will become a kind of binding criteria for providing European public funds to projects and sectors. So I think the importance of the EU taxonomy is highly underestimated in the market, and that's why, from my point of view, a lot of information has to be distributed. And so let me stop at this point.
Okay, thank you. I had a question for Carsten, but I have to go first back to Sebastien, because you mentioned the CFOs. How, I mean, you talked very cavalierly about CFOs, but how do we actually get them to take in, to get involved in it? I mean, it's very hard. Carsten, maybe you have an answer to that, because you've been working with a lot of
I do have a view on that. We do a lot of consultancy for industrial enterprises, mainly mid-size and large. And I think it has been really difficult, but there's a significant shift happening right now. Over the last 2 years, the dialogue has moved from being a shop floor dialogue with the technical manager to being a dialogue with the CEO. It has moved from being a dialogue on how do we save 5% on the energy bill to being a dialogue on how do we decarbonize by 2050 and get some part of the way by 2030, because we're being pressured by our stakeholders, our customers, if we have direct consumer customers, our financiers and other stakeholders. At least that's the situation in Denmark, and I think it will become general at some point. So it's easier now, but it also means something else. It means that it's not just a discussion about energy efficiency. Energy efficiency is just one of several tools to achieve decarbonization. So there's a move from discussing energy efficiency to discussing decarbonization. And that also gives a challenge because at the moment when you're only using electricity and the electricity grid is decarbonized, as it soon will be in Denmark because we have a lot of power from windmills, suddenly you have solved the problem, and then energy efficiency maybe is not so attractive anymore. Right. So there are several sides to it, but I think it has moved from being a technical discussion to being a strategic discussion, and that is really good. Now is the time to engage with companies.
Okay, yeah, to add up to the question, I think that it proved to be quite a challenge.
We're losing you again. Okay, well, let me go. I mean, in terms of getting to CFOs, I was involved with a UNIDO project where we actually, not mandatory, but just audits. And we tried to get the energy audit company to write an executive summary that would go to the board or to the CFO to make it a strategic, so that written in their language, not the language of the technical director, So we tried to do it that way. Sebastien, I think we're sort of having a problem with your, Bettina, will this taxonomy influence the value of the stock market in the long run? What about companies with less than 500 employees? For example, in Germany, less than 16,000 of 3.3 million companies, or 250 or more companies.
Okay, so I think it has to be distinguished between, we have to ask, what is the relevance of the EU taxonomy for whom? So what kind of obligation will be triggered by the EU taxonomy and for whom? So large companies for large companies, there will be a new reporting requirement, which is triggered by the fact that they have to report under the non-financial reporting directive. And this new reporting requirement looks at to which degree the activities of a given company is linked to and is in line with the EU taxonomy criteria expressed in turnover, capex or opex. For smaller companies, they are not obliged to to report under the non-financial reporting directive. So they do not have this kind of reporting obligation. However, a smaller company, for instance, wanting to finance their energy efficiency projects via an energy efficiency fund or a sustainable fund, they might see themselves in the future increasingly confronted with the question, well, we would like to increase our share in taxonomy compliant projects. Can you comply with the criteria? Can you show that your project complies with these criteria? So in that situation, and it's not the situation right now, but I can well imagine that there will be a kind of competition in the market of sustainable fund providers, sustainable fund managers, wanting to distinguish themselves by offering a high degree of taxonomy compliant investment. So the dark green slide of the sustainable investment market. And this will lead, or can possibly lead, to the situation that Janssen company is asked to comply with the taxonomy criteria. If not, well, I'm very sorry. We will not, I'm talking extreme now, yeah? We will not finance your project, or this or that. So the EU taxonomy criteria have very high ambition. I mentioned this in my speech. So, and when I first saw it, I thought, well, the ambition is so high, it will be impossible to comply with. So what is the reason for requiring such an ambition level of thresholds? The answer was, we wanted to lead the way towards carbon neutrality. So if all possible, we set the criteria in a way that in 2050, they can still be valid. So this does not apply to all economic activities. Some of them also look at the transition towards carbon neutrality, but wherever possible, the ambitious level of the criteria is set in a way that it can remain until 2050. So it gives a clear orientation on how an economic activity has to be put in practice to reach carbon neutrality, to be on the right path. So
you've answered another question. We're having, sorry about that. But there was another question: what does the EU taxonomy benchmark against? The EU climate neutrality by 2050 or interim goals? You've basically answered that, you know?
Yeah. So yes. So basically, it's carbon neutrality. It's the compliance with the Paris Agreement. So the EU taxonomy wants to lead the way towards compliance with the Paris Agreement, which is in essence carbon neutrality. However, it is not possible to define these criteria for each economic activity which might be out there in the market. That's why there is a distinction between allowing also for transitionary activities to be taxonomy compliant. However, and this is also important and gives another degree of ambition and complexity, many criteria will be tightened over time. Mm-hmm. So what is acceptable now might not be acceptable in 2 or 3 years. So that's also how the taxonomy leads the way towards carbon neutrality, because there's a tightening of criteria over time. So in this sense, it's a very straightforward approach. However, will this lead to increased investment flow? Well, we will see.
Okay, I know Carsten raised his hand to come in on that, but I want to get back to Sebastien about the CFO, because I'm afraid you're going to rush out to see your kids. So I'd rather just...
Yeah, just to answer, you raised a very good point. How is it to reach CFO? And it's not easy, definitely. So the way it's more easy to reach, for instance, banks. For instance, we have 10 banks that are dealing like 90% of finance in France. So you reach those 10 banks, and then you ask them how you could be connected to people on the ground that are facing industrial for real. And that's more easy because they are more centralized organization. So we're trying to address in a different way those CFO. There are some CFO clubs that exist, or organization where they would meet, discuss about the regulation and compliance. We try to embed into those networks. We also try to embed into a federation of a network, Chemistry Industry Federation, Agri-Food Industry Federation. I mean, trying to all the federation that exist, and also through the bank themselves, because they would see as an added value to say, oh, for the services, choose my bank rather than the others, because they would let them client know, oh, for there's a free training session that exists about the green finance. You should definitely embed. So we try also to have our bank people that we train being ambassador of the program toward their clients. So for now, we have trained more bank than CFOs, but definitely we hope it's going to work well. So now, happy to update you in months to come, but that's not the easiest part for sure to spot them.
Okay, in your PowerPoint, you use the word banks, but are you really talking about financial institutions in a broader sense? I mean, or are you really just in your project working with banks?
First things, banks. Then there might be a next stage where we go wider. There could be tomorrow asset managers who, as a shareholders of some companies, will say, okay, I'm a shareholder, I want to know what you're doing. Maybe you should get more interest into that topics. So that might be the next stage, but at first...
Okay, I just wanted to get that clarified, because when I saw your PowerPoint, I wasn't quite sure.
Yep.
Carsten wanted to jump in a few minutes ago, but Carsten, I also want to ask you about EEFIG and the Underwriters Toolkit. We had talked about revising it at some point. Would material on taxonomy be included in the next?
Yeah, I think it's clearly the plan that the result of the involvement in the taxonomy project will be reflected in a upcoming time not clear, but the upcoming revision of the underwriting toolkit.
But also, in terms of the Underwriters Toolkit, you always think of that as for financial institutions, but that would be quite a good guide for companies as well to be using in terms of developing their own business case.
Yeah, I think at least for the CFO, it's a good guide because it mainly addresses the financing issues. I think if you're the technical director, you may find it less interesting from your perspective.
Okay. But you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just wanted to. I really like Bettina's presentation. I think it's an extremely important subject she's been talking about today, and I think a lot of the challenges that Bettina raises are something that is yet not sufficiently understood in the market. I do think that there will be a supply chain effect. Also in supplier finance, what we see is more and more financial institutions wanting to align with the Paris Agreement. We see pension funds that want to, for a competitive reason, want to launch green products. If you're a pension fund and launch a green product, you will now in the future have to comply with the EU taxonomy. And that means you have to clean up a portfolio or you have to establish a portfolio that is compliant. And that will have an effect on which companies that specific portfolio can invest in or which assets. So I think there will be a supply chain effect that potentially at some point could result in a brown discount for people who are not able to comply. I think we are seeing the same, at least for some banks, that they are starting to tag their portfolio in what is green and what is brown. And then if they want to comply with the Paris Agreement, they engage with their brown assets and try to say, how should we work together to try to green your activities? And for the SME segment, I think it's also important to understand that large companies generally are working with their supply chains and rationalizing their supply chains, and sustainability is increasingly becoming a parameter when you rationalize and choose which suppliers do you want to have as strategic suppliers. And possibly, unless of course the taxonomy is so stringent that it becomes irrelevant, and I think that is a challenge, as highlighted by Bettina. I think possibly the taxonomy in itself could at some point be a tool when large companies work with their supply chain, and therefore it will end up also being relevant for SMEs.
This could be very interesting with their supply chains when we're looking at free trade agreements with non-EU countries, you know, like even over with the UK right now. But that's another thing. Let's not get into that.
And may I also jump in to answer the question whether the stock market might be affected? I mean,
yes.
assume that investors look increasingly at so increasingly the subject of sustainability matters for investors.
Right.
So the degree to which a company can prove that they head towards sustainability and base their proof, for instance, on the EU taxonomy and on the fulfillment of the taxonomy criteria, and on a high share of taxonomy compliant activities, this might be a very convincing argument for sustainability oriented investors. So it might have an impact on the stock market on the long run.
Here's a related question.
I'm sorry, I'm gonna have to leave. I just want to thank everyone. I was really glad to attend this panel, and I'll be more than keen to answer to future questions that either some speakers or attender of the conference might have. So sorry for leaving now, and thanks everyone for this great conversation.
Thanks. There have been several questions, and we may ask you to answer some more later. So that's great.
I'll be very glad to. Very glad to.
Excellent.
Totally.
Thank you.
Have a nice day to everyone. Thanks a lot.
That's best.
Bettina, well, it's mainly to Bettina. Would it not be essential to require all companies to state by what year they aim to become net climate neutral and what their status quo level of total emissions is, at least scope 1 and 2 and energy related emissions?
So, well, I think you would overburden the corporate sector with information and reporting requirements. As it was mentioned earlier on, this is not the primary subject they look at, struggling in times of COVID-19 to survive with their business. They say, well, climate crisis, I'm not interested in your climate crisis. I want to survive my business here.
Exactly.
So I think with by raising this kind of requirement, you would lose the companies. I think it would be better to create a different argumentation line to motivate them to investigate into the advantages for them on the long run, to position themselves among competitors when they look into sustainability and invest into sustainability.
Carsten, you want to come in?
Yeah, I just want to add that, I mean, it's quite clear what the EU objective is in 2050. It's complete decarbonization. So if we want to have intermediate targets, for instance, in 2030, I think first step is that we get a European climate law approved with an intermediate target, and then that we agree on some kind of burden sharing between countries.
Okay. Well, this has been quite a roaring level of discussion. There's more questions, but there's a limit. I just wanted to point out to the audience that my co-panel leader is Diana Wang, who's been feeding me all these questions that have been coming from HUVA. And so, Diana, just say hello, okay?
Yes, thank you, Rod. I'm really happy that we got so many questions.
And but I think, I mean, all of these issues we've raised are going to keep coming up and coming up. And so that's one of the good things, Carsten, that we do have these working groups for EEFIG. In fact, Bettina, you were involved in some working groups, I believe. You certainly were on the one on tagging and taxonomy anyway. And Carsten mentioned the 2015 EEFIG report on recommendations. I mean, you were fundamental in that because you were in the commission at the time, seconded from your bank. So you've been a fundamental player in the whole history of EEFIG. Well, both of you have been, which is to your credit. So anyway, I'd like to thank you. I'd like to thank all the audience who have raised some very good questions. I mean, Sebastien had to leave, but anyway, this has proved to be an excellent session, and thank you very much. And there's a networking session in half an hour if people would like to participate. This is the first time I've ever gone to an ECEE networking session that I didn't have a glass of beer in my hand or a glass of wine. But that's, you know, this is the modern life we live in. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much.